5 days. That's how long I have to create this entire character model and the process video you're watching right now completely from scratch. But that shouldn't be too hard, right? All we need to do is create a fully colored and illustrated turnaround sheet, a 3D model, then we have to create the texture maps, then we have to do the UV unwrapping, rig her face, then rig her body, then we just have to animate 1 or 2, super polished animations for social media.
And then just script, edit, and record this entire process video completely from scratch.
Easy, right, Lucifer?
Bro is more cooked than a Thanksgiving turkey.
Alright, we don't got time to mess around, let's get right into it. I used a lot of Van Ripper reference, who, if you don't know, Van Ripper is the creator of Helltaker. They have a beautiful, amazing art style. I've been inspired by their work for years. And I also used a lot of Modeus cosplay reference, which is just always so helpful to use cosplay reference to get that real world version of the clothing you're designing and building in 3D. And I also used Magic Dog Wisdom. I also gave her hands. This is my very first low poly model with hands. And by the way, this Modeus model is downloadable on my Patreon page for my members. Link is in the description below. Plus, if you become a member of my Patreon, you're gonna get your name in the credits of my videos. And according to my analytics, a whopping 81.1% of you watching this video are not subscribed, so please make sure to subscribe to this channel and click that bell for instant channel notifications to make sure you don't miss out on the cool videos we got coming up next. It'll make all of my suffering worth it. That was a joke, I'm joking, maybe. Now, Van Ripper has a beautiful sort of flat shaded coloring method that he has in his work, but I tend to render things out a little bit more than he does, and that's what I ended up doing here. Kind of a style mashup, if you will, while also being heavily inspired by Megaman Legends art style. And I'm using these blue rulers as guidelines to make sure things are lining up on my model so that, for example, on my front view and my side view, I have her eyes lining up at the same place, I have her eyebrows lining up at the same place, I have her horns lining up at the same place, I have different parts of her dress lining up, and you just want to make sure that your front view and side views are as consistent in 3 dimensions as possible. And as for the shading, I'm doing things like adding highlights to the eyes, adding lots of shadowing for things like the hair, edge highlights around the horns, and plenty of shadowing and details around her jacket and skirt. In particular, I really liked how her shoe shading and legging shading ended up turning out. I think they look really nice. Keeping up the pace here, I'm spawning in a basic human rhetoric skeleton that I'm importing in a transparent image plane of my low poly Modeus turnaround drawing. Then I'm splitting it up from the front view, side view, and back view and putting it in a box shape around my skeleton so that I have the general scale and shape reference that I need to create 3D versions of Modeus here, starting off with her torso. I originally had the torso and skirt as one big connected 3D model, but I actually ended up separating those two, which ended up being a huge time save, making rigging her skirt a breeze because the topology between her skirt and her legs was so similar. It was very, very easy to rig her skirt, which is not typical 3D behavior. Rigging skirts is actually extremely difficult most of the time. You might have also noticed that this is my first low poly model with hands. I wanted to try something a little different than the, giant mitts I usually give my low poly models. Something with a little bit more articulation, which proved very challenging later on, as you'll see we'll get into, but it was a thing. Once again, modeling her hair was a complete nightmare. I've yet to find the cool, super easy, fun way to model hair. It always ends up being really challenging. I don't even know if there is one, honestly. It was really tricky to kind of get it to look like Modeus's hair, because again, when hair is just even slightly curly, it becomes so hard to make a 3D model out of when it's low poly like this. So I struggled quite a bit with the hair, but eventually I pulled through and got something that looked pretty okay. The 3D model for her tail was actually pretty easy, though I did end up cheating it a bit because I wanted it to be perfectly round, so I actually did end up adding a subdivision modifier to it, which I don't do for basically any low poly model I've ever made. But I kind of wanted that visual trick here, and you can even turn it off if you want to and it still looks good. I just kind of preferred how it looked when it was subdivided. By the way, Modeus's hands, legs, and face 3D model were all started with parts from my low poly parts kit, which is included in the Gumroad version of my low poly course. So make sure to click on the link in the description below that links to my low poly course if you're interested in that, because it includes that and a bunch of other things that are going to greatly speed up your low poly character creation process. Goodness knows it saved my bacon when I was working under this deadline. Link is in the description below. Now it's time to unwrap the UVs on my 3D model in order that I can bring color and texture to my character here. In order to do that, I'm going to need to create a texture map. And the way I made Modeus's texture map here is by starting off by going into Photoshop and creating a 1024 by 1024 texture map. So that's square aspect ratio texture map that's 1024 by 1024 pixels. Then I go into the front and side views that I created in the beginning of this process, and I'm literally cutting and pasting different parts from my turnaround drawings and pasting them into this 1K texture map, which is actually significantly lower resolution than my turnaround drawings, which is great because when I'm taking things from my turnaround drawings, it's not going to be super pixelated most of the time, and it'll hold up in this 1K texture map. My models usually have a few different texture maps, one for the main body and another for their face and all their facial expressions, and I'll usually create additional texture maps if they have something like an accessory that's pretty important, and Modeus is going to have one of those as well. And keep in mind, when I say texture map over and over here, I really just mean image. As of late, I'm painting all of my texture maps using PSDs because that's a really convenient format where if I save a PSD, I don't need to export it, which makes my iteration process a lot faster. But you could also just use a PNG or even a JPEG.
Do
you
I
could use
look like I know what a JPEG is? I just wonder.
And as per usual, I am literally just using the project from view option over and over again. Not the only way you can rip UVs on low poly models like this in Blender, but it's what works for me, and it's very fast. I get a lot of questions on how I paint stylized textures, and my first piece of advice to that question would be to learn how to paint and understand the fundamentals of color. That brings me to today's sponsor, Skillshare, because I've been wanting to get better at painting around the holidays here, and with the classes and learning paths on Skillshare, it has never been easier to get started and learn. If you don't already know, Skillshare is the largest online learning community for creatives and has thousands of classes led by industry experts in illustration, film, design, and more. Skillshare can help you grow and take your career, hobbies, or passions to the next level. And there are lots of classes on Skillshare, from designing a 3D video game in Unreal to becoming a freelance illustrator or even learning Photoshop by an Adobe certified instructor. However, as someone who makes a lot of stylized characters, as you're seeing here, that require lots of texture maps, I'm always looking to improve my coloring because I know that as I improve my painting abilities, my design, textures, and final 3D models are going to look that much more polished and clean and improve right alongside my ability to paint. That's why I've been taking Melissa D. Nobrega's digital painting in Photoshop, creating a stylized portrait class on Skillshare. I really love how Skillshare classes have a learn by doing approach to teaching, just like my very own channel here, where members can create and share a project after completing a class, then get feedback from the community. Plus, Skillshare's new Learning Paths feature makes it easy to become an expert on a skill from the ground up, because learning paths are curated sequential class collections in order to master a very specific skill or competency. The first 500 people to use my link in the description of this video will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare, so make sure to click that link below to get started today. I got a lot of questions in my last video asking how I make this stylized style of face rig. Now, maybe that's worthy of its own tutorial one day, but here's the short version. Essentially, I have a standard face model, just like the one we create in my tutorial series where we create our own low poly character from scratch. I take this face model, then I apply a texture onto it where the cavity of the eye is actually all transparent pixels, meaning that you can actually see through that part of the face. And because they're transparent, I then model the white of the eye inside the head here. After I model this white of the eye inside the head, all I'm doing is spawning in a plane. So it's literally just like 4 birds in a square. It's a plane, and I'm projecting another transparent image, this time of the iris. And I have both of her irises in the texture sheet, her left and right, because they're asymmetrical. They are not the same. They're slightly different. And I'm projecting both irises onto both of these image planes and putting them inside of her head. That way I can change the expression on her eyes, pose her eyes around after I'm done rigging them using bones, and overall have a very expressive face. Stay tuned and subscribe to this channel though for more updates, because I may end up making a full tutorial on that one day. Her blush is also set up very similar to her irises, where they're just flat planes that are transparent with the blush texture applied to them. I did that because the blush looked a little awkward if you just projected it on the face, because it got very jagged and looked really weird from certain angles, so it ended up going on its own plane right on top of her cheeks. Now we get to the part of the process where I'm fairly certain I actually started going insane. If we look at this time allocation chart I put together right here of everything I was spending time on, I think Magic Dog Wisdom did end up getting the vast majority of the time. I think it ended up being a bit over 700 hours I put into this. And I think it shows, Modeus Spider Season. Modeus is known for having that book, Spider Season. It's really simple too. It's just like one color, a spider web, and it says Spider Season. But I got so carried away and distracted with Magic Dog Wisdom, I actually forgot to give Modeus Spider Season, and now I'm out of time. She's never gonna get that. She just has Magic Dog Wisdom now. Okay, this part is not a joke. When I was making this, when I was done making it and put it into the scene, right? I had to hide the model, or if I had Photoshop open in a different monitor, I had to minimize it because I would just keep looking at it and laughing. My partner said she could just hear me laughing in the other room, like a psychopath at the Magic Dog Wisdom book I made. I thought this was the funniest shit in the world. It is so not. I was just losing my gosh darn marbles, dude. I was so gone at this point of the process. Sleep deprivation brain was fully in gear. Anyway, like I mentioned earlier, rigging her skirt was a total breeze because the topology was so similar between her skirt and her legs. Rigging the hands absolutely sucked because I was just doing that totally from scratch, YOLO style. It was not fun at all. But I did end up rigging her eyebrows, I rigged her hair, I rigged her irises, and as a result, they're all posable, which gives her a lot of expressibility. And once again, remember, you can download her full model and rig, the final one that we're gonna create and animate in this video, on my Patreon page. Plus, you'll get your name in the credits of my videos. Link is in the description below. And here I'm just doing some final changes. I'm adjusting her iris texture a little bit, rigging things like the hearts effects she has, the little heart emoticon effect she has, and rigging the Dog of Wisdom. Now it's time to make the final animations and renders with Modeus. So you can see right now a different animation idea I had initially here, where she kind of leaned forward and kind of mimicked this pose we can see on the left here. I ended up changing that and doing a little bit more of an idle animation, as if, Helltaker was like a 3D visual novel. I kind of wanted that kind of vibe from it, and I like how it turned out. So without further ado, let's see how the final animation and 3D model ended up looking like. Any characters in the low poly style you'd like to see me create next, make sure to comment them right below. I love hearing from you. But in any case, make sure to check out my full character modeling playlist on YouTube if you want a breakdown of how to make your own characters in this style using Blender. If you want to jumpstart your journey into making low poly characters, make sure to check out the Gumroad version of that series because it has a bunch of bonuses that are greatly going to speed up your character creation process. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.